Okay, we're live, Alexander. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. I wish to extend Easter greetings to everybody here on the Duran who celebrates what we might call the Western Easter. I would add that today in London, in Britain, is a public holiday, Easter Monday, and I assume it is also in much of the Western Christian world, not, of course, the Orthodox Christian world, where we celebrate Easter next weekend. But to those who celebrate Easter today, and they include my wife, by the way, Easter greetings to you all.
Easter greetings to everybody. Welcome to our live stream. We'll keep this a short one, and we'll go for about an hour, Alexander. Then we're going to have to do a hard stop. So any questions, we'll try to answer whatever questions we can answer, given our time constraints, but anything we don't answer, we'll do them for a separate show. So just keep in mind any questions from any super chats, any questions from Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, as well as locals, all the questions on locals. We'll try to answer what we can. Whatever we can't get to, we will leave for tomorrow. We'll answer them in a separate video and get them up soon, because we just kind of want to do an update on what's going on in
the
Ukraine.
general situation.
Yeah, the general situation as to what's going on. And I know there's a lot of people that are asking about Gonzalo. On our end, we're just going to say that we know what you guys know. So, I mean, there's really nothing that we have to report. Whatever you guys know, we know. We're all in the same situation with regards to Gonzalo. So a lot of people are asking, but we just don't have anything to report. But once we do, if once we do, we will definitely reach out. If it's accurate and factual, then we will reach out and let everybody know if it's proper to let everybody know. So that's really all we have. That's why everyone asks, Alexander. But I mean, we just don't have anything to share because we don't know either.
Absolutely, that is exactly right. We have the same feelings about this that everybody else does, but we just don't have any more information than everyone else. So I mean, we only have open source information. So we are certainly not going to speculate, because I think that's actually unhelpful at this time.
Yeah, I agree. The speculation and everything that is all over Twitter and Instagram, just it's all. I mean, people are just putting screenshots up on these social media sites and just it's all speculation. So let's.
It's all speculation, exactly. Yes.
Let's leave it there. Is there anything you want to add to that, Alexander? Or
no, I want absolutely nothing to that. And I would just say again, please let's not. I would encourage people not to speculate, but just to wait for real news. I mean, as you know, as everybody knows, on the Duran, we are anyway careful about when we speculate, even on big topics. And when we do, we make it clear that it is speculation and we are theorizing, but we do so on actual facts. We have no facts at the moment, so we're not going to speculate in the absence of any facts. And can I also say that when it comes to an individual, a person, I think that's anyway extremely unhelpful. And I would encourage others to just follow that advice too.
I agree. So let's just leave it there. Let's leave it there, and let's give it some time. I think, and we'll wait and see, and we'll leave it there.
Yes.
Let's get to some questions, Alexander, real quick before we get into an update. We've got some super chats. Let's knock them out, and then we'll get to an update as to what's going on in Russia and in Ukraine, Russia, NATO, the European Union. David S. sent us a super chat. Thank you very much, David S. And Brazilianaire Bob said, can we all spare a moment to reflect on the incredible soul of our community, Gonzalo Lira, who we have not heard from since Friday? Our thoughts and prayers are with you, brother. Thank you very much for that, Brazilianaire Bob. And let's see, just to say, stay safe, Alex and Alex. Of course, my prayers and wishes go for Gonzalo as well. Thank you, Sanjiva, for that.
Yeah.
Johnny, thank you for that super chat. Pamina Benson says, this is just a small contribution compared to what you give us every day. A fantastic super chat. Wow, thank you, Pamina. Thank you very, very much for that. And Zanika says, thanks for your consistency, guys. Happy Monday. Praying for Gonzalo. Thank you for that. Super chat. Possum Power says, off topic. Alex, what brand is your sunglasses? Humor is needed during these dark times. Yeah, the sunglasses are called Ojo, like Spanish for eyes. Ojos. OJO. Those are my sunglasses. You can go to their site and actually pick those up. Jimmy Jones says, love this show. Keep up the great work, fellas. Thank you very much, Jimmy Jones. I think those are the opening questions. Alexander, the update as to what's going on in Ukraine. Got a lot of stuff going on. I don't know where you want to start. Azovstal, phase 2.
Azovstal. Well,
I've also, when you finish, I've also got a different theory as to how I think this is going to wind down, how the map might look.
Right.
But we'll get into that. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just comment about the mood here in Britain about the war, because, of course, a couple of weeks ago, when the Russians pulled back from Kiev, and we've discussed at exhaustive length why they pulled back from Kiev, I would refer people back to that live stream we did with Scott Ritter when we analysed the military aspects of it in immense detail. Anyway, there was this period of euphoria, lots of talk in Britain about Ukraine winning. Now, over the last couple of days, the mood has changed radically, and one gets the sense that even though people are not saying so openly, they're now starting to get really worried about how the war is going. And probably the trigger has been the events in Mariupol, where obviously the situation is now coming to some kind of catastrophic, apocalyptic end in the Azovstal works, always assuming that these people don't give up, which they might still do, by the way. And of course, there's also now the trickle of reports coming from Donbass and elsewhere in Ukraine, and talk about the fact that the Ukrainian army in Donbass is being absolutely battered. And I think we're getting more of that coming out in trickles and places across in Britain. And it's interesting to see how the media in Britain has now started to downscale increasingly the story of the war in Ukraine itself. We've also, by the way, had information from the Chancellor of Austria, Mr. Nehammer, and he came back from Moscow. You remember he went to Moscow last week. He had a meeting with Putin there. He came out with all kinds of comments. The Russians have never provided a readout. Anyway, Nehammer now says that after his discussion with Putin, he came away with a clear impression that Putin believed that Russia is winning the war. And that's from the Austrian Chancellor. It's not from us. It's from somebody who's actually met Putin. Now, it could be that Putin was putting up a front, but everything I've seen suggests that this is true. And then, of course, on top of everything else, we have this darkening picture economically. And this morning, when I got up, I found this headline in the Financial Times: war and stagflation threaten global economy as pandemic recovery slows. It's not slowing, it's crashing. But note the reference to stagflation. I think there is now universal acknowledgement across the West that we are probably now in a deep inflation crisis. Inflation is running out of control. That is cutting into demand. The financial authorities, the monetary authorities, don't know fully what to do. The Fed says it's going to increase interest rates, but there's lots of people who say that it can't above a certain level. The European Central Bank is not increasing interest rates. Real interest rates not just real, nominal interest rates in Europe, the European Central Bank's interest rates are still in negative territory. and the European Central Bank continues to engage in QE. In other words, it is pouring more monetary fuel onto the inflation fire. It's quite extraordinary. But of course, with Christine Lagarde in charge, what can you expect? She's trying to support France, which is going through this difficult election, as she sees it, with Le Pen chasing Macron's coattails. So she's doing everything she can to keep the French economy going. And of course, the other person she's trying to support is Mario Draghi in Italy, who is also seeing problems in Italy now intensify. So we see this ludicrous policy now, from the European Central Bank. One wonders how sustainable it is, but virtually everywhere else, including in Britain and of course in the United States, we see the darkening or a further darkening of the economic mood. And by the way, here in Britain, opinion polling now shows that people are becoming more worried about the economic situation than about the situation in Ukraine itself, which suggests that their willingness to agree to further sanctions that could make things harder for themselves is starting to wear thin. So it's a darkening mood again. We've had periods of up and down. We had a brief period of euphoria after the pullback from Kiev, but that, it seems to me, is dissipating away.
Yeah. So Ursula von der Leyen was actually giving an interview, and she said that the Russian economy is on the brink of collapse.
Yeah.
It's about to go bankrupt again. This is her statement. She made the statement like 2 days ago. The EU, I believe the EU and the US are still clinging on to this fantasy that if they hold out vis-a-vis with regards to Russian energy and the difficulties that sanctions against Russia is giving their countries, if they can hold out until, say, autumn, then they will get that collapse in Russia. President Putin will be gone, and Ukraine will be wrapped up with victory for Zalensky, and that'll be that. And then cheap energy for everybody. And I think they're hanging on to that dream. But how realistic do you see that? And do you see any change to? And I don't even want to call it a change because maybe it wasn't. But do you personally have a new perspective as to what Russia is aiming for with regards to an end game to this conflict?
Well, I mean, the end game, I think the Russian end game is an evolving thing. I think that when they started this campaign on the 24th of February, I think they still had hopes that Zalensky and his team and the Western powers would come to their senses, would do a deal. They would agree to recognize Crimea and Donbass, Crimea as part of Russia, Donbass as independent, that Ukraine would agree to drop out of NATO, and that there would be a clear up of these very right-wing people in Ukraine. I think that was what the Russians were still hoping for. I think that the Russians have completely given up on that. The Ukrainian foreign minister, Kuleba, has said that diplomatic contacts with the Russians have now come to almost a total stop. The negotiating teams still exchange messages at a desultory level. But I think after that brief moment in Istanbul 3 weeks ago, when it looked as if Ukraine was going to make substantive concessions, but then pull them all back, I think the Russians have said, we're not prepared to negotiate any further with these people. They are agreement incapable. The Americans and the British run everything in Kiev, and I think they've completely given up on all of that. So I think that the Russian thing is evolving. Their objectives are evolving. We now see more and more flags, Russian flags appearing in Kherson region, Russian flags appearing in Zaporozhye. Also, by the way, Soviet flags. I remember for many Russians, the Soviet flag is now the war flag because it is the flag of the Red Army, the Red Army fought under during the Second World War. So, as I said, I want to make that point because the two can be that there can be some misunderstanding of this. But beyond that, I think that the very next steps will be, there's already talk of a referendum in Kherson region, something in Zaporozhye will surely follow, probably at some point in Kharkiv as well. We're seeing Ukraine gradually being taken apart bit by bit as the Ukrainian army in Donbass is being taken apart bit by bit. As for the economics, I come back to what I said, just as perhaps the Russians were over optimistic when they thought that they could do a deal with Zalensky and his team at the start of the war. So I think the European Union and the Western powers were completely wrong when they thought that the Russian economy was a house of cards which would simply tumble. I think that Ursula von der Leyen, who is now utterly committed, I mean, let's be straightforward about this, a pullback from sanctions and an economic settlement and a political settlement in Ukraine, which leaves the Russians with all their gains and with Putin still in charge of the Kremlin, is something which she would not be able to survive. So what these people in Europe, in the EU, what the neocons in Washington, what they're all going to do is they're going to double down. They're going to do more and more of what has already failed. They're going to say to themselves, well, if we can't, if we know what we did in February, freezing the central bank's reserves, de-swifting Russian banks, if that didn't work, well, let's de-swift more Russian banks. Let's start seizing more Russian assets. Let's block us off from ever more Russian exports. So we started coal, let's go on to oil, let's eventually move forwards to gas, all in the hope that the Russian house of cards, as they believe it, will collapse. And of course, I don't think it will. I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Russian economy operates. I've been saying this all along. And I think that that will, of course, deepen the inflation crisis in the West, deepen the political crisis that's now coming after the economic crisis. But don't expect Ursula, Charles Michel, Josep Borrell, and in the United States, people like Sullivan, Blinken, Nuland to change course. These people do not change course. They have no reverse gear. And if things really start to look really bad on the battlefield, and if the economic situation isn't working out, in fact, it's turning out bad, then the major worry is going to be that these people will start to agitate and demand something more in terms of military steps. They've been sending pouring arms into Ukraine. These are not making, I think, the difference so far that everybody expected that they would. In fact, they're not making any difference at all, as far as I can see. But you know, at some point there will be demands for Western troops to go in onto the ground to challenge the Russians directly. Now, that is going to be the most dangerous moment in this conflict. But sometime in the next few weeks, months, I predict it will come. Now, at that point, we will see whether the Pentagon is able to hold the line against this, whether the militaries in NATO are able to hold the line against this, and what popular feeling will be.
You mean to hold the line against the push to put troops into, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Steve-O says, any news on Gonzalo Lira? As we said, Steve-O, we know what you know. So we promise we will keep everyone posted if we get any kind of factual updates, and that's the key word, factual. Alexander, I was reading Jacob Dreisen.
Yeah.
Who you
can I just before you proceed? Can you just before I proceed? I've done there's a program that I've just done for my own channel. I speak a lot about Jacob Dreisen. He does a brilliant blog. Certainly somebody, if people want to get a view of what's going on, they should go to him. And he's an American. He's an ex-Marine. I think he speaks both Russian and Ukrainian in some way. And, you know, he's somebody to certainly follow. Carry on, Alex. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and Robert Barnes also recommended him. We'll have Robert on tomorrow, actually, as well. Mm-hmm. That'll be at 10 a.m. Vegas time. I think that's 6 o'clock London time, I believe, for you. Alexander. So we'll
That's
be
right.
doing a show with Robert tomorrow. But I was reading, Dryson, I was reading an article from Helmer, which was posted on our locals community, John Helmer. And it got me thinking that I believe our first initial thoughts as to how this is going to end up, in other words, what everyone talks about, how will the map look, to put it in very simple terms. I think our first thoughts are actually now, I'm leaning towards that analysis is correct. And what do I mean? As this conflict progressed, we started to say, okay, maybe they're going to go all the way to Lviv. Maybe the plan is for this to be a prolonged war, a long war, and they're just going to take all of Ukraine because they have to. And we heard from a lot of excellent analysts who believe the same. But our first thoughts when we started to look at this conflict was some sort of a rump state Ukraine, a Ukraine that's cut off from the sea, Ukraine where the West is kind of left on its own devices.
Yes.
And Russia taking pretty much everything from the east all the way down through Kherson, Mariupol, Kherson, Odessa, all the way to connect to Transnistria. I'm starting to believe that again, that's the plan. That's going to be the victory. And I say that because when you look at two reasons that I'm thinking of, and you'll probably have more. When you look at the weapons that are trying to pour over now from west to east, you're seeing that the Russians are taking out those weapons pretty much. Whatever weapons do get through, very small stuff that isn't making a difference. And even the stuff that's bigger that is supposed to make a difference, by the time they're integrated into the Ukraine military and all of these things, it just doesn't do any good. Most of this stuff is to prop up the military industrial complex and to get that stock price pumping. But what Russia is doing, in a way, as they're destroying these weapons, they're also starting to destroy railway links, roads, transportation links. And it's almost like they're creating a de facto border already. And I think they're not very interested in Kiev. But what they're going to do is they're going to say, you know what? Kiev is not that much of an interest. Odessa is a huge interest. Kiev, not so much. We're already creating a kind of de facto border. We're cutting off all transportation links. We also have some natural borders as well. We have Kherson, which is looking like it may break away with a referendum very soon. Let's wrap up Kherson. We've got Mariupol in the bag. Let's wrap up Kherson, and then let's go and see how we're going to handle Odessa. Once we have Odessa, it's pretty much game, set, match. They're going to deal with Donbass. I don't think that's going to be an issue either. All this hype about this huge war, whenever I hear all this media hype, I tend to say, maybe it's not going to be this big thing. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. But I'm thinking that's reason number one why we may see something like that shape up. And number two is because I think it would be the biggest middle finger FU to the European Union to say, you know what? You've poured all these weapons into the West. You've got this rump state, which is cut off from the sea. It's a big mess. It's a basket case. They're asking for $50 billion already in aid from the G7. EU, you guys deal with it. Take it, and just let the EU collapse. Trying to figure out, what do we do with this? I mean, what do you think of that?
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. I don't have, obviously, an inside idea of what is going on inside the Kremlin, but I suspect it's an evolving picture. I think definitely Kherson, Zaporozhye region. I suspect ultimately Kharkiv as well. Conceivably, at some point, Dnipro, those places. And of course, Odessa, which is the big glittering prize. I think the Russians care a lot about Odessa. All of those, I would have thought, they must be in Russian sights. Kiev, complicated, difficult place to take, difficult place to hold. And of course, the countryside around it is Ukrainian speaking. And it's rich in agricultural resources, but little else. It'll have lost all its major industrial, scientific facilities, except those which are located in Kiev. And of course, what kind of a government would be left there would be incredibly unstable, and it would be incredibly, well, shall we say, discredited and cut off, as you rightly say, from the sea. So one could certainly see that might be the Russian plan. I think it has another advantage from a Russian point of view, which is that, of course, it bankrupts the European Union, because, as I said, they would have to keep the money going to sustain this black hole, which it would be, by the way. Economically, it would be a black hole to keep it going. I mean,
and they're going to be forced to keep it going.
Absolutely.
They're not going to be able to just wash their hands. Like the US could say, whatever, next, but the EU is going to be forced to prop this up.
Absolutely. And of course, what then could happen? And you remember, the Russians are people who do know how to work for time. Time is something that they understand very well. It's always been the Russian way. I mean, it's not even a planned thing. It's just a sort of instinctive thing. Sometimes trade space for time, use time as your ally rather than as your adversary. But, there might even be a calculation, somewhere within the economic ministries that are taking place in the economic intelligence groupings, think tanks within Moscow, that when the EU itself collapses, what is left of Ukraine will fall into Russian hands like a ripe plum. Just drop, because it will have nowhere else to drop to. Once that link is cut, you don't have to fight for it, because, well, realistically, it will have nowhere else to go. So it's entirely possible that is the plan. But as I said, you can already see how the various pieces are being picked up across the board. I have to say, I think that this replacement of Ukrainian flags across these regions with Russian flags, the introduction of the Russian ruble into these regions, and all the replacement of local administrations which don't cooperate with the Russians, and this talk of a referendum in Kherson region, all of that is a clear sign of where things are going.
Yeah, we've been reporting on it for a while now, that Kherson is going to go through with a referendum, and they're going to break off. That seems inevitable. That is the end. That's the end, especially of the whole South. Once a chain reaction like that happens, when something like that happens, it's a chain reaction, and that's it. They're all just going to start to break off.
Absolutely.
The other advantage, and how can Odessa? Another question: how can Odessa survive just being isolated there?
No, it can't.
I mean, it's going to have Transnistria on one end, and this new republic controlled by Russia on the other.
Well, indeed, it would be incredibly easy to cut off. And I'm going to say something else. If it becomes clear that the Russians are now consolidating permanently control of Kherson region and Zaporozhye. And by the way, as I said in the program I did yesterday, I think the only reason there hasn't been a major Russian move on Zaporozhye is because the Motorsich factory, which is the biggest factory in Zaporozhye, which makes gas turbines and aircraft engines and ship engines and all those things, has major Chinese investment behind it. It's the only reason why the Russians aren't bombing it. It's the only big industrial facility in Ukraine that makes things that are relevant for the military-industrial complex that the Russians haven't bombed. And the reason they're not bombing it is because the Chinese largely own it. But anyway, having said that, once Zaporozhye, Kherson, all these places, Nikolaev, all these regions go, I'm sure the Russians will eventually aim for Nikolaev. Odessa becomes untenable. And of course, it has another point, which is, of course, that as it becomes untenable, the consistent pattern of Ukrainian policy is to try to hold on to everything. So one can easily imagine a situation where the Ukrainians start to concentrate more and more of their troops, such as are left of them, and their hardware, such as is left of them, in Odessa region, where, of course, they would fall easily into another Russian trap, into another Russian cauldron. But that's the kind of thing they would do: transfer forces to Odessa, to cling on to Odessa, cling on to the last place they have on the sea. weakening their military positions in central and northern Ukraine, allowing the Russians to move on to places like Sumy, Chernigov, Kharkiv, and the rest.
How much of a burden would it be for the EU from an economic standpoint to have to deal with this rump state of Ukraine, which is not going to be a small state, by the way, either, but it's going to be completely landlocked. And it's also going to be surrounded by Belarus and Russia as well. I mean, this state is also going to be completely surrounded.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to put numbers on it. We're talking about tens of points, hundreds of billions. I mean, to be very, I mean, if you think integrating East Germany into West Germany was expensive, then I mean, wait, this is going to be multiples worse. And of course, it's impossible to see how it can be pulled round. I mean, the only way you could pull it round, in theory, is by doing some kind of deal with the Russians to allow it to trade this rump through Odessa. How do you reconcile that with the economic war that you're currently waging against Russia? I mean, it is. I mean, I could see that this would bankrupt the EU. I mean, you think Greece is expensive. I mean, Italy. I mean, this is going to be multiples worse than that, and it's untenable anyway. It's unsustainable.
Can I throw another thought at you, and then we'll get to some questions that we have. I think we have time. We have like 30 minutes. We'll get to some questions and try to answer as many as we can. If this is the case and the Russians wrap it up with this type of strategy, getting that land bridge over Odessa to Transnistria and calling it a day, and not really caring that much about Kiev. Do you see the Russians also saying, you know what, not only is the EU going to have to deal with this statelet, this shadow of a country known as Ukraine, they're going to have this type of burden, but every hint of militarization of this state, serious, strategically serious militarization, we're just going to bomb it. Do you know what I mean? Like what we're seeing in Lviv the past couple of days. We've just seen strategic bombing of various targets, and that's it. The Russians don't go in there. They don't really deal with it. They just take a certain structure out, and then they move on. I mean, that could be something that they do for 5-10 years. I mean, there's would be like a noose around the EU's neck.
Well, I hope not, but I mean, I can see how that can very easily work out. And can I just make a point, which I had a discussion with Tom Longo on Saturday. And of course, the point that he made was that missiles are cheap. I mean, many of these missiles that are being launched are cheap. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was reading in the British media that the Russians were running out of missiles. I mean, I think the first piece I read about that was, in mid-March, and then on the 22nd of March, that the Russians were about run out of practically everything: missiles, fuel, food, tanks. Well, manifestly, that is not the case. We see missile strikes across Ukraine gradually, not even gradually, steadily increasing in intensity, almost with every day. And I'm going to make a guess as to why we're seeing that, by the way. I think that since the war started, the Russians have been increasing the tempo of production of these things. And I think what we're actually now seeing is that the more production happens, the more of these missiles they have to launch. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this happening on an ever greater scale. And this can be sustained pretty much forever. At which point, of course, who's going to invest in Ukraine? No one. Who's going to be able to sustain Ukraine like that? No one at all. This would be a disaster for the EU. It would be a calamity for the Ukrainian people. And in order to avoid it, one does hope that somebody in Kiev, and if not in Kiev, elsewhere, it would have to be the United States, because Brussels is never going to do it, finally realizes that this is unsustainable and searches for a compromise.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that $50 billion ask from the
Yeah.
Ukraine finance minister from the Zelensky regime, and I was just
Yeah.
like, this is going to be a never-ending story. This is going to be
Absolutely.
like we need 50 billion just
Yeah.
every year. It's not going to end.
Oh, it's not going to be every year. It's going to be.
Well, I'm,
There's going to be.
I'm
They're going
saying,
to need.
yeah,
No, they're going to need more than that.
they're
I
going to
mean,
need
if
more.
the kind of thing that you're talking about is true, we're not talking about 50 billion. We're talking about hundreds of billions every year to sustain a place of that scale. I mean, it's going to dwarf anything that we've seen. I mean, forget about the bailout of Greece, much smaller place. Forget about that. This is going to dwarf everything. And of course, there's a limit to how many euros you can produce like that. And of course, bear in mind, um, if we have the situation that you describe, it's not going into any kind of productive, creative economy, because an economy that is locked in permanent war, cut off from the sea, can't sustain itself.
Yeah. Any comments
Can I
about?
just make a
Yeah.
comparison, which is with South Vietnam? Something very similar happened in South Vietnam. The United States was pouring weapons into, obviously, the Vietnam War, and it was also having to spend vast sums keeping the South Vietnamese economy going. And the combination of those two things, together, it must be said, with Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program, fueled the inflation fires in the United States, tipped the United States into permanent deficits, permanent budget and trade deficits from which it has never really escaped, and was one of the factors that caused the United States in 1971 to break the link to gold with the dollar and to move entirely towards a fiat currency. So, just bear in mind, but, for the EU, this would be a much bigger burden than South Vietnam ever was for the United States.
Yeah. Any thoughts on, real quick before we get to the questions, on Germany, the economy in Germany, the EU, the Russian economy?
Yeah, I
Any
mean,
final thoughts there? I mean,
Russian,
Germany's
well, I
coming out
mean,
with a lot of strange statements with regard to how things are going, and Schultz isn't
I
doing
know.
well in popularity at
No,
all.
no, no. I mean, they did not. Now, I gather mood in Eastern Germany, the former GDR, is now turning very bad, and sooner or later it will catch up in West Germany. I mean, the thing with the Germans, and I hope people from Germany who are watching this will forgive me when I say this, but the Germans are always easy to win over, on a sort of moral plane. And this has been presented to them very much as a kind of morality play up to now. But of course, sooner or later, very soon, in fact, as the bills start to mount, as the household bills start to intensify, this is going to have a serious effect. And perhaps the most interesting thing is that there is now apparently a gulf starting to emerge within Germany between sort of West German middle class people who continue to support war, say, yes, of course we can put on more blankets, lower our thermostat, or we must do all these things to support Ukraine. There's still people like that talking in that kind of way, and industrial workers who, of course, are now becoming increasingly worried about the future of their factories and their jobs. And the head of one of the big German trade union groups has now started to make warnings, which is supporting those the German industry itself is making. And sooner or later, I would have thought that this is bound to feed in, especially within the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, Scholz's party, which is, of course, historically based upon working class votes and support from unions. That's greatly eroded over the last 30 years, as it has with all so-called left-wing parties. But I'm sure that we will be seeing that, more of that. And even middle-class people are going to start to be affected. So, the Germans are still all fired up at the moment, at least a lot of Germans are, not in East Germany, apparently. But you can already see the cracks and the divisions starting to grow there. Elsewhere in Europe, I think this process is much further along including, by the way, in Britain.
Yeah, Italy's doing really bad too. 2.74 trillion in
Absolutely. Yeah.
Alex warning Russia to consider bombing the steelworks as it will release the chemical weapons and Russia be blamed for the Azovstal. There's a lot of talk about what Russia's going to do with how they're going to handle Azovstal. I will say this, Alexander, then we'll get to the questions. Definitely. We'll have like 10, 15 minutes of questions.
Yeah.
Whatever Russia does with Azovstal, as I'm reading many of the Western publications, it will be framed as some sort of an atrocity.
Of course it will. I mean, it already. That's a given. That's an absolute given. I would make one observation about Azovstal. It's the very last one I'm going to make, which is that the Russian Defense Ministry the other day, and I want to stress it is the Russian Defense Ministry. I can't corroborate this, but they said that the people in Azovstal were complaining to Kiev that they were running out of food and water. Now, food surprises me because I'd have thought they have plenty of time to store food. But unless they have some connection to the water supply system, you cannot store water because it takes up a lot of space, even in a 1 square kilometer place. But, it's been rained with bombs and shells and all those sort of things. So if they start running out of water, if they generally do run out of water, well, people can only keep going for 3 days without water. I mean, that's the average, even when and of course, if you're fighting or in stress, then you're not going to be able to keep going for much longer than that. And if you're underground, in darkness, in tunnels and bunkers, and you have massive bunker busting bombs on you, and you're short of water, you're going to become increasingly disorientated. I mean, this is a horror, and whatever should happen, the right thing to happen, and I'm sorry if I go on and on about this, is that these people should give up. I mean, they're serving no useful
Well, they're not allowed.
Right.
They're not allowed.
Well, they're not being allowed to. Yeah. But that is irresponsible and actually criminal, in my opinion. And I have to say, I was revolted by some of the headlines that I read in the British media yesterday, talking about, these people fighting to the death in Azovstal. Very comfortable, easy thing for people in air-conditioned, warm offices in London to say. When you are, as I said, in these terrible conditions, asking young men to go through that, they may have political views that I find obnoxious, but they're still human beings. I think that's a disgraceful thing to try and encourage them to do.
You know what they decided, the powers that be behind Zalensky? They decided that it's much more useful for them to quote unquote fight to the death. They can get a lot more use out of it than to have them surrender.
Absolutely, that's exactly correct.
They understand that. They said they could frame a narrative around it. They can call it a Russian atrocity. They can martyr them. They can do all kinds of things than to have them surrender, which would be for the people behind Zalensky would be an embarrassment. It would probably filter across Ukraine as well, because 2,000 people surrendering would probably get to other soldiers in the Ukraine military who would say, well, what's going on? I thought we were winning the war. It would be hard to keep that quiet as well. So I think they realized, you know what, it's better to let them fight to the death. We can get a lot more use out of it than to spare their lives, which is
you're absolutely right. That is entirely what it is all about. I'm going to make a direct comparison with the Second World War, which is with Stalingrad. The German leadership, the political leadership, the certain Austrian gentleman that we all know about, wanted the people there to fight to the death. Eventually, they decided the command in Stalingrad decided better. And the reason that the political leadership wanted the German soldiers in Stalingrad to fight to the death was exactly the one you gave. It's all ultimately about PR. It's all about, creating a dramatic, heroic story of, the Spartans of Thermopylae. And I've already said in an earlier program why that's a misunderstanding. Anyway, that's what they want to do. It's all about creating that narrative rather than dealing with the actual realities and showing any sign of humanity to the people who are really there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap it up, Alexander, and get to a lot of try to get to as many questions as we can.
Right.
Zishan, thank you for your super chat. And by the way, thank you, Alan Watson. I believe Alan is in the house moderating this live stream. I see Alan Watson there, and Reckless Abandon. I also see. Thank you guys for moderating this stream. And GEC 812. GEC 812 is also with us. Thank you to our awesome moderators. Zishan, thank you for a super chat. Kirill, thank you for that super chat. Liam says, shout out to my new girlfriend, Beth, who told me that her dad watches your channel. I was intrigued, so I watched it. Now I don't miss an episode. Did you see the article by the former Swiss Colonel Jacques Body? Thoughts? Yes.
Absolutely.
On Grayson.
Absolutely. He's done a follow-up one, and they're brilliant, actually. Somebody else I'd like to have on our programs, but there's so many people now that we want to have on our programs, but brilliant article.
Absolutely. Commando Crossfire says, we are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous. Well said. Well said, Commando Crossfire. Sanjiva says, Nabulina said that Russia will enter a period of difficulty during its transformation. I have a lot of respect for her. If she had served any other country, she would have top billing. God bless her.
Absolutely true. And I completely agree. And she's absolutely, there will be a period of difficult economic adjustment. But I think to say something, and just to say this quickly about Russia, Alexei Kudrin, the finance minister in the golden years of Western Russian cooperation in the 2000s, the person who many people in the West said was the greatest finance minister ever. Anyway, he's now come out basically supporting the war, which I found interesting. But more importantly, and much more importantly, he said Russia will, have period of adjustment. He put it at about 2 years, but he said it will come through. Now, he's the chief auditor. He is perhaps better in a really good position to know. And he's not somebody who is, widely seen as especially pro-Putin any longer. So, even he thinks they will come through. There's different perspectives on how long it will take. The Prime Minister, Mishustin, thought 6 months. Others I put it more like a year. Nabulina put it about a year. Even Kudrin thinks at most it will be 2 years. So they will come through. Whatever the West does.
Rod Garcia says, my personal subscription for your tireless efforts. Thank you, Rod, for that amazing super chat. And American Bonaparte says, can you maybe explain more about neoconservatives?
This is a massive topic. That's a huge topic. Yeah. They began to emerge, very briefly, they began to appear in the 1960s at the time of the Vietnam War. Many of them, the originals, were ex-Trotskyists who carried over many of their Trotskyist beliefs. They are not conservatives by any definition. They are, in fact, in my opinion, a revolutionary group that has retained a lot of their original Trotskyist origins and has carried them over into what the United States does. And they are deeply ideological. They have this they have this conception that they want to use the power of the United States to extend their vision of the way in which the world should be restructured to every single corner of the United States, with themselves in charge. And they are not identical to the WEF globalists in Davos that we hear so much about, but there is a big overlap between them, and to all intents and purposes, they work together.
Yeah. Can you explain the long tables used in the Kremlin real quick, Alexander, with the meetings with Putin? For example, with Macron.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was partly what it was said, to deal with the infection. Putin took the infection very seriously, the goof. But I think also because, it's been interesting that he's been able to meet with other people quite close. I think also it was an intention of keeping these people at a distance.
Yeah. Let's see. 515 Coldfire says, where on earth is Gonzalo Lira? 515. We explained in the beginning as well, but let's just wait for factual information.
That's factual all we can information. Yeah. That's all we can do.
Absolutely. Kaliu says, Swiss Colonel Jacques Bad wrote in his article that Ukraine had more than 100,000 Western mercenaries in their army, and this before the war. Do you think this is accurate?
No, I don't think it's accurate. I think it's I mean, he makes many claims. I think some of these claims are overstated. By the way, the Russian military has given a number, which is more like, I think it was 7,000
7,000.
at the
Around 7,000.
start, and now that's fallen because many of these people are dashing back. The Russian military also say that there is about 400 Westerners bottled up at Azovstal.
Correct. Very true. Kirill says, I wonder if when the EU portion of NATO is going to send troops into Ukraine, particularly with oil, gas, and food dependency like that in a state of economy like that. Yeah. You kind of
Oh,
answered
that's
that.
it. I have. I mean, I'm not going to put a date on it. When things look really bad, and it looks like the house of cards isn't falling, I mean, do expect that cry, that demand to grow. And as I said, it'll be very interesting to see how it turns out. And that'll be the moment of maximum danger.
Well, they'll get sent into the West Ukraine. They're just going to be bottled up there. That's what I think is going to happen. They're just going to get bottled up.
There. Absolutely. Well, but don't exclude the possibility that the Russians might, launch the odd Kinjal, hypersonic missile at them, or indeed more than just one. So this could be nerve-wracking. We'll see what happens.
Rocco says, so nice to hear the truth. Keep it up. Thank you, Rocco. Pierre, thank you for that awesome super chat. Peter, welcome to the Duran community. English Loyalist says, have you heard anything on Gonzalo Lira? Someone said he has been missing for 4 days, and I see he made no updates to his Telegram. 4 days is not accurate. And as we said in the beginning of the show, let's just if we get any factual information, we promise we will relay it to everyone. If we get factual information.
Yes. Let me repeat again.
Yeah.
What we've said. Speculation at this point is not helpful.
Exactly. Andrew, welcome to the Dragon community. Raphael says, I believe Russia just located their Yamamoto out of the crowd. If I were Boris Johnson, I will be very, very careful from now on. Watch out, bro.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised. I think I know what you're referring to, which is the Moskva affair. There's been lots of speculations about this, by the way, all over the place. One thing I will say is that the British media over the weekend were again gloating in, I thought, a horrible way about hundreds of drowned sailors and about and the Ukrainians claimed the captain had been killed. Well, the captain certainly hasn't been killed because he turned out at a ceremony in Sevastopol. And it looked to me, from what I was able to see of this ceremony, that there were an awful lot of the sailors there. And they didn't look to me as if, this was the majority of them had been drowned. It doesn't look to me as if they have. There's been some photographs of the ship circulating today. There's some speculation those photos are fake. There's some speculation that this ship was actually attacked by a submarine rather than missiles. I am in no position to make any guesses. In the discussion I had with Tom Longo over the weekend, and it's something I've touched on in my program on my channel yesterday, there was some suggestion that maybe a Western country, perhaps Britain, played a role in that. That might explain why the Pentagon looks to be so unhappy about this whole affair, is not rushing to give credit to the Ukrainians. And if it is the case that the British were involved, my sense is the Pentagon is furious with them, because that would make the British a co-belligerent. And for all I know, all kinds of hard words are being exchanged behind the scenes. And you're absolutely right. If the British had any part of it, the Russians will not forget and they will not forgive.
Lucas, thank you for that super chat. Yield, Bandicoot, welcome to the Drown community. Commander Crossfire says, does Russia label NATO troops mercenaries in order to bypass Geneva as retribution for NATO involvement, force NATO to either admit their full participation in the conflict or suffer the consequences?
Yes, I think this is a topic which I'm hoping we'll be able to talk about with Robert Barnes, that we're going to have a tough discussion. But I think that your thinking about Russian intentions is absolutely correct. I do have some legal concerns. But I think I'm going to save that to the discussion with Robert Barnes.
Yeah. Divine Insurgent said, you two were born and raised in the Anglosphere. Do you feel more attachment to your ethnic background or no? Alex C. I may feel that way due to my location.
I feel an intense attachment to Britain, which has been the country where I've lived nearly all my life. I also have an intense attachment to what the Greeks called the ethnos, which isn't quite the same as, ethnic group, but to Greece, to the whole civilization of Greece, to the culture, the church, all of those things.
Yes. Trevor.
I've never up to this time felt a conflict of loyalty between the two either. I hope that remains that way.
Thank you, Divine Insurgent, for that. Trevor, welcome to Duran Community. Fragile says, we should not panic, people. Gonzalo is a smart man. Maybe he just went underground, changed locations, or simply communication center may be destroyed and there is no internet connection.
Well, again, as I said, I thank you for all of that. I'm not going to be tempted into speculations. You've heard what I've said. I've heard all of that. Thank you for saying it. But as I said, let's be constrained on what speculations we indulge with. You don't know who's listening to these programs, for one thing.
Raphael says Le Pen will be elected president to stop this war. They're smearing her already, but
I think that was a bad mistake, by the way, for the EU.
But they can't help themselves.
I know, but that was incredibly misjudged, and for all I know, it might even tilt the election in her favour. I'm not so close to the ground in France to be able to say, but that was so ineptly done to do it just now in the run up to election day.
So obvious. Hello World says, what are you guys hearing about China? Apparently she is rounding up Yang faction and it's ongoing civil war. The CUF lockdown is just cover.
I don't know. I can't really say. To be honest, I don't know China especially well. I've only been there once. And it was very interesting and very informative. And of course, I do follow the Chinese media, but the Chinese media is very controlled. What is going on there in detail, I really can't talk about. I think civil war is certainly putting it too strongly, but there might be power struggles underway, possibly.
Let's see. Okay, let's wrap this up. About another 10 minutes. Callberry, thank you for that super sticker. Lucas, thank you for that super chat. Today, Savory, thank you for that super chat. Trung Tran says, is there a chance that Zalensky is being assassinated by the West and the blame being put on Russia? Will there be a chance to de-escalate after that?
It's entirely possible that something like that could happen. If I was Zelensky, I would be very careful.
You mean to blame Russia?
Okay, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I know, absolutely. I mean, he looks frightened. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. And, it's the kind of thing one doesn't want. Again, needs to be careful to speculate about. But, I gather that he made another appearance. There's pictures of him that came out briefly and then had to be withdrawn because he looked so terrible in them.
Hi.
And well, yeah, absolutely. I gather. Anyway, whatever. But there have been times when he has looked to me a very frightened man. That's all I'm going to say.
Zook, thank you for that super chat, which says afternoon all. Thank you, Zook, for that. John says, do you all know if Gonzalo Lira is okay? We've answered that. John, let's pray and hope everything is okay and sit tight for factual information. RDDR says, we pathologize Russia because we use liberalism to ignore their realpolitik interests, even though Ukraine is hardly liberal. Excellent point.
Well, indeed. Very good point. Excellent point.
Lucas says, what's your opinion about the current situation given what happened in 1940 to around 20,000 Polish POWs killed by Russians in Katyn? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a major issue between Russians and Poles, and it should not be underestimated. And can I just say, people who continue to dispute, there are some people in Russia who continue to say it wasn't the Russians. The Russian government has always admitted, that it was the Soviets who did it. And of course, under Gorbachev, the Soviet Union itself admitted it, and they've apologized for it. And, this is obviously a major factor in Polish perspectives towards Russia, indisputably so, and completely understandably. And it comes on top of a very, very difficult history in relations between Russia and Poland as well. Well, the Russians have admitted to it. They've held ceremonies in Katyn. I think what has to happen at some point in the future, when enough time between now and then has passed, is that people in Poland and in Russia need to put these old issues behind them and try to reach out to each other and try to achieve some kind of friendship and understanding, which is two great Slav nations I'm convinced that they can do and one day will.
All right, Gloria, thank you for that super chat. Hunger, the Dive Merchant says, the fact that Eastern Europeans are depleting their weapon depots, which are not easily replaced, makes it more likely that they would be invaded. Nothing would stop the Russians if they wished to do so.
I've actually read many people saying this. In fact, even the Pentagon is now running short of certain types of light arms, javelins and stingers and things, apparently, and it's going to be very expensive to replace them. I mean, you'd be absolutely right if the Russians had any real plan of rolling into Eastern Europe, but of course they don't. In the meantime, what's going to happen is that BAE in Britain, Raytheon in the US, Boeing, all these various companies in Europe, they're going to make a vast amount of money on this. This is a wonderful exercise of the MI6 to make itself rich. As Alex said right at the start of this program, a lot of these arms transfers to Ukraine are simply a way of giving money to the MI6.
Yep. We saw it just a year ago with Big Pharma. Now we're seeing it with the MI6.
Absolutely.
Same racket, different industry, same racket.
Exactly.
Summer of 1970. Thank you for that super sticker. Yo says, wait for me and I'll come back. Wait with all your might. Wait with dreary yellow rains. Tell you nothing's right. 1941, wow. Konstantin Simonov.
Wow.
Thank you very much for that. Fantastic. Yeah. Tempest says, do you think Russia will keep the wheat fields for itself and also secure the source of the Denibro River?
I think if Russia controls Odessa, they don't need to control all the wheat fields. I mean, remember, they have vast wheat fields themselves. And if they take over Kherson and Zaporozhye and all those sort of places, they get control anyway of many of the best. So, I mean, just bear that in mind. But of those that are left, I mean, where does all the grain get exported through? It gets exported through Odessa. Now, it's much, much more expensive to start trundling, large amounts of wheat and grain around the world by putting it on, rail and sending it to Antwerp or wherever it is in Europe. I mean, that adds massively to the cost. So, of course, in the meantime, if the Russians are able to continue to send their wheat and grain through Odessa or wherever, well, of course, from their point of view, they can undercut any kind of Ukrainian wheat. So Odessa is crucial to this.
Yeah. Dimitra says, greetings, gentlemen from Elas. Well said. Greetings, Dimitra. Thank you for that. Jam says, have you listened to Putin's Munich speech in 2007? What are your thoughts on it? Scott Ritter mentioned it in one of his videos. Yes, we've talked about it.
It's an extraordinary speech. I mean, that was, in my opinion, Putin's coming out, actually. That was when he really began to speak with his true voice. Mm-hmm. I mean, up to then, he'd been giving the impression that he was all friends with all sorts of Western leaders. Maybe to some extent he thought he was, but in 2007 he came out and spoke as he did. And the pictures of it, with John McCain sitting almost in the front row, glaring at him, it's just extraordinary. The whole sort of imagery of that speech is remarkable. It's a remarkable speech, and it really is very worth reading. Mm-hmm.
All right, Chelsea Old Boys says, afternoon, my Cypriot brothers. Good afternoon, Chelsea Old Boys. And Raphael says, guys, pay attention. Russia is doing this alone. Okay, yes. Well,
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
for the most part.
Well, not entirely alone.
Not entirely, but for the most part.
But for the most part, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they've got big help in China as well, with different aspects.
Different aspects of it, but in military terms, entirely by themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, Raphael, for that. Ignacio, welcome to the Duran community. Mikasa Aikman says, what percentage of the population in the UK and Greece would you estimate are pro-Russia? How would you predict this percentage to change in the future?
In Britain, very difficult to say. I mean, there may be lots of people who have private doubts, but they'd be very nervous about expressing them. You're talking about middle-class opinion. I mean, it's solidly anti-Russian. You will find within working-class communities people who, if you really push them, they're sometimes prepared to come up with different views. But, those people tend to be very intimidated, and it's very difficult to get any kind of appearance on the surface about this. What I have noticed is a dearth of opinion poll data in Britain on this issue, which may suggest that the opinion polling agencies in Britain are getting outcomes, results that they're not entirely happy with. About Greece, I leave it to the expert who is there.
The last poll I saw was after Mitsotakis allowed the Azov NAZI to speak at the parliament, and after he sent 4 planes worth of weapons to Ukraine, 70% of the Greeks were against Greece's involvement in this war and were switching to the Russia camp. I don't want to say switching to the. I don't want to make it sound like that, but they weren't very keen on this. Support Zalensky at all costs narrative.
Yes.
And that was 70%. So Mitsotakis really, really messed up.
Yes.
In the eyes of the EU. In the eyes of the EU, he really messed up. Backstage, thank you for that super sticker on Odyssey. Chelsea Old Boy says, Scott Ritter says it straight. Great job, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Scott Ritter.
We'll have him on again soon. Yes. We'll have him on again soon. Maybe we can get Jack Ball. Of course we will.
Sparky says Ukraine is better off under Russia than under the NAZIs.
That goes without saying. But anyway, there we go.
Balke says Russia has 2 Brits. That equals the 2 Skripals. That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Interesting observation. I never thought of that, actually.
Paul, thank you for that super chat. GB says, name of the blogger again. Jacob Drysden. The Drysden Report.
Drysden Report. We'll provide a link.
Let me see. Well, give me one quick second, and let me see if I have that.
Yeah.
Okay. Just dropped it on locals, and let me drop it on the chat here. Yeah. There's a link.
Excellent. Yeah.
So many platforms now. Let me drop it in Odyssey. All right. That is the link. Let's see. AZ Maria says, what do you think will happen to Zalensky in 1 month, 1 year, 5 years?
I'm not going to try and guess. I don't want to, actually. I would be nervous if I was in his position. Well, I would be. I think he is nervous, actually.
Yeah, I think he's very nervous. Commander Crossfire says, if West Ukraine is split and left for the EU-US doesn't fund it, do you think it would turn back to Russia or become a failed state?
I think it will first become a failed state, and then eventually, as I said, it will drop into Russia's hands like a ripe plum. What else? What choice does it have?
What choice does it have? Daisy, welcome to the Duran community. Well, parts of it would go to Hungary and Romania as well. Certain parts, I wouldn't be surprised to see that. Herding Cat says, how will the EU manage to rebuild a destroyed nation and support its own economy with such major energy, mineral, and food shortages? Exactly.
Well, exactly, quite true. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, don't worry. Ursula von der Leyen is going to find a way. She's, after all, as we know, an economic genius.
Everything's going to be green in 2 years anyway.
Well, absolutely. I mean, quite so. Robert Habeck is on the case as well. I mean, he's going to convert us all to windmills. So, I mean, we don't need to worry about these things.
Kalu25 says Russians are going to give them water. Very, very well said. Kali 25. FMAC says, when all is said and done, do you see another Berlin Wall, perhaps?
I think we are already moving that way. I mean, I've been in contact with a friend of mine in Russia who used to travel regularly to the West. He's one of the more, I wouldn't say westernized, not at all westernized, but he was a person who studied in Western universities, for example. and he's finding it difficult now. By the way, on a completely different front, lots of Russian professionals who apparently left Russia at the start of the war have apparently been trickling
They're going
back.
back. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're going back. Yeah. The insufferable butthole says, will economic problems stop the Afghan migrant crisis?
That's a good question. I would have thought not, actually. And I don't know whether this is true. And I really want to stress this. I don't know whether the exact numbers that I've seen quoted from him are correct. But apparently Macron is now predicting another great tidal wave of immigration to Europe from all sorts of places. Because however bad the situation is in Europe, let's be straightforward about it, it's going to be far worse in these other places too. And again, I have to say, Macron really was talking like that in the run up to the French election on Sunday. I can't think it's going to do him any good.
Eurogabor says sanctions on oil, gas, and nuclear fuel is a no-go for Hungary. If certain EU countries willing to put one foot over the other and shoot it through both, so be it. Ursula will tear the paint off the wall. Well said.
I agree with that, but don't forget that with Hungary now starting to look isolated, if Hungary tries to veto sanctions moves, there could very well be a move now to strip Hungary of its voting rights on the EU Council. Now, at that point, the sanctions could be railroaded through. It might be that at that point, Hungary makes a decision about what its future relationship with the EU is going to be. And, you know, it might even decide to leave the EU. I'm sorry, impossible. But, you know, Hungary is an obstacle, but it is not a major one.
Yeah. Rob Seimer says, what happens to big and small investments in Ukraine when this ends?
Well, that's a very good question. The Russians take it over. I think they will allow a lot of those small investments to continue. Big investments are another matter, especially if you're talking about companies that either pulled out of Russia or if you're talking about companies that are not really companies at all, but are really agencies for carpetbaggers. And if a certain creative artist who is related to the president of the United States is listening, well, that refers to people like you and your friends.
Peter, welcome to the Duran community. Let's Go says, your thoughts on what's going on with the lockdowns in Shanghai?
I think it's a terrible mistake by the Chinese government. I think this is completely unsustainable. I think they're holding on to a model that has failed. And I think that sooner or later they'll have to accept that.
Teodoro, thank you for that super sticker. Eric, thank you for that super sticker. Zook says, did Trotsky have a direct influence in the U.S. when he was put in exile? Next follow-on question, did the neocons evolve then? Thanks.
He had a huge influence, not just in the US, but across the West. And dare I say it, he had a much bigger influence in the US than he did in some Western countries. I mean, bear in mind that in continental Europe, the dominant political left in the West in the 1940s and 50s and early 60s was the communist parties, which were loyal to Moscow. That never happened in the United States or in Britain. And it was Trotsky's groups that were extremely influential in the West there. So we already had that bifurcation. And of course, they did evolve eventually in the United States into these neocon groups. And you see something very similar in Britain too, by the way.
Fadista says, will foreign mercenaries' families have legal standing against their home country politicians for any harm or death due to being encouraged to fight? Yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. And I can tell you straight away, there is legal precedent for this. I mean, people have been encouraged to go out and fight, and, you know, the circumstances in which they're sent into battle leads to all sorts of terrible results. Well, believe me, there are legal consequences in that too. And of course, political consequences as well.
Liz Truss. Yeah. Adam, thank you for that super chat. Divine Insurgent. I was in Thessaloniki and Old Macedonia and en route to Albania a while back. Is that one of the better parts of Greece? Where else do you recommend? Santorini is mentioned frequently.
Santorini is a beautiful island. I will say this, It's extraordinarily interesting and unique, but it's very westernized in some ways. You have a lot of rich Westerners buy villas there, so that's not my particularly place that I think of as specifically Greece. My favorite part of Greece, I'm not going to make any bones about this, is the Peloponnesus, and also the area around Olympia and Epirus, which is the sort of more mountainous regions. I'm not as familiar with the islands as I should be. This is a reflection of the fact that I'm from Athens.
Lost in the Fog of War says, what do you know about Ukraine blogger Gleb Lishenko?
I don't know very much about him.
Yeah, me neither. Paul Stocks, thank you for that super sticker. Rich says, any big NATO submarine cannot sail into the Black Sea. If they do, the area is in full Russian surveillance, and any NATO submarine will be sunk by Russian Shkval, super captivating
cavitating torpedoes and things.
Cavitating torpedoes, which the West can't handle.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. Okay. Well, can I just say straight away? I mean, if it is a NATO submarine, if it was a NATO submarine, it would have to be something from Romania, presumably, or Bulgaria. I'm not familiar with the structure of their navies or whether they even have submarines. But Erdogan closed the straits under the Montreux Convention, as he's required to do, but he did. And you're quite right. NATO submarines can't enter, at least not in theory, through the straits into the Black Sea. So, if a British submarine did it, it would have had to do it with Turkish collusion. I don't want to go down this range of speculations because we're making assumptions here that we don't really have enough data to do that. The other possibility that's been suggested is a mine, and we know there's a lot of mines around that part of the sea. And the other possibility, which I think even more remote actually, is that it was naval divers, which again I think is extremely unlikely.
Let's see. Lair Republican says, why do more conservatives and far righters want to get out of the EU more than NATO?
Well, I don't know. That's a very good question. But I mean, can I just say, for me, NATO and the EU are the terrible twins. I think that in order to break this, you have to get out of both. Both are, well, the NATO is long past its sell-by date and is a threat to peace. The EU, as far as I'm concerned, is a threat to the to Europe and to the European civilization and culture, which I was brought up with. And, well, so I'll say, I love.
Sorry, they seem to be building something on top of me or something. I don't know. Let's see. Where are we here? Elena Diaz says, how long can the weapons industry produce when commodities continue to rise in price?
Well, they can continue to produce because what you'll find is that they will simply pay more for whatever they need, and they will therefore get it. And it'll be civilian industry that finds that it's running out. It's always the way. They always say, we have to have priority rights to strategic minerals because, of course, we're dealing with security, with defense. It's always the way that works out. There's extreme example of that was Germany in the 1930s, by the way, where the German military industrial complex was getting everything it wanted. And of course, the rest of the German civilian economy was becoming increasingly unable to get things like rubber and, certain types of metals and all those kind of things. And in fact, there was a deterioration in German civilian goods, the quality of German civilian goods during that period. Many people may have heard of the expression Ersatz, sort of lower quality goods. Well, that comes from that period.
Have you read the interview by Sergei Glaziev? He proposes a news from Jawuku. He proposes a new Eastern-led commodity-backed basket of currencies, which could free the global South from the IMF and Western currency-denominated debt.
Absolutely, and Glaziev is a very clever man. He's very close to Putin, though Putin listens to him, he hasn't so far followed all of his political dictates. And one does get the sense that his star in Russia is rising. So he's certainly someone to watch.
Let's see here. How long can we expect to have the EU and NATO around?
No, I think as I don't know, but I'm going to make a guess. Not as long as some people think. I tend to take the view that they are probably now entering their last days. I go back to what Alex said in an earlier program. They were very, very unwise to invest so much of their prestige in Ukraine. If they lose there,
put it all on the line in Ukraine. V-Plan, thank you for that super sticker. Petros, thank you for that super chat. Scora 43 says, hello from Serbia. What are your thoughts about UK sanctions against Serbian representatives? Ahmad. Sorry, Alexander.
Serbian rep.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about UK sanctions against Serbian representatives in Bosnia? UK also deployed SAS team to Bosnia that will try to arrest or assassinate Milorad Dodic. Thanks and much love.
I know. I mean, can I just say, I mean, the SAS isn't a huge organization. Parts of it are in Ukraine, parts of it apparently are now in the Balkans. I mean, they're going to be spread very thin before very long. And that's very tough on a special forces organization, by the way. I mean, those sort of troops particularly need rest and time to train and reorganize. But for the sanctions, I mean, sanction Serbia because the Serbians do things you don't like, threaten to sanction India, talk about sanctioning China, sanction everybody everywhere. And of course, what happens is that you end up sanctioning yourself. So yes, the British are going to do that. The Americans are going to do that. The Anglosphere has now turned to threatening everybody. Already it's been pointed out that US and British policy is all stick and no carrot.
Raphael says, let's have a little fun. You both are Greeks. Do you like the movie Mamma Mia? New Jersey people hate it. The TV show Sopranos. LOL.
I haven't seen it. I don't know about Alex has seen it.
I think I saw it on a plane. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that where the song comes from, by the way?
Yeah. It passes the time if you have a long flight. Thank you, Raphael, for that. Let's see here. Senor says, do you think if Putin cuts off the gas now, that would force European countries to stop the sanction madness?
Oh no, he won't. He will just intensify it. I mean, I think that they'll blame their energy shortages on Putin, say that he's done this evil thing, and we must retaliate even further by sanctioning even more things, deepening the economic war. So I think that's how they would respond. Of course, eventually it'll become unsustainable. But we're not there yet. At the moment, they will just double down and then triple down, then quadruple down. What was it that, they always attributed to Einstein, that he didn't apparently say it, that madness is doing the same thing again and again and again and again and expecting a different result. Well, that's the kind of logic we're trapped into.
Darren says, it's not enough to win a war. It's more important to organize the peace, from Aristotle.
So true. Excellent. Absolutely correct. That is exactly right. And by the way, I think that the Russians understand that a lot better than we do.
Sparky says, this Cold War was to stop the expansion of communism. Russians are no longer communist. They are no threat to the world. Western sheeple seem to forget this.
So true. And you see how so many Russians tell you this. I mean, the whole point about, for many Russians, many Russians became very exhausted and disillusioned with communism. But there were some who said, we've got to ditch this failed system because, we want to rejoin the world. We want to integrate with the West. And they discovered that, in fact, the West wasn't interested in that. And it's had a massive impact on the way Russians think.
Dan Karna says, you guys should get the great anti-war writer Scott Horton on. He gave a great speech on the history of the conflict in Utah that's turning into a book.
Oh, right. Okay. Gosh,
We'll
many
try.
people
Yeah,
will try. I mean,
Thank you for that.
people.
Yeah. Sparky says FDR's doctor administered cocaine to him before his day after Pearl Harbor, December 8th, 1941 address to clear his voice. Maybe Zelensky is the next FDR. He doesn't need a doctor to administer. It seems he doesn't need a doctor to administer cocaine. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Dan sent another super chat to get Scott Horton on. We will definitely try to get in touch with Scott Horton. Very familiar with his work. Yes. Raphael says, guys, tell UEFA to give the Ballon d'Or to Benzema now. We have a Benzema fan. Yes. We will try. We'll contact UEFA. Raphael. Thank you very much for that. Nutella99, welcome to the Duran community. Sparky says the new Iron Curtain keeps the West out, not the East in. Interesting way of looking at it. Well said, Sparky. Well said. Randall, thank you for that super chat. Wasabista says, gentlemen, do you know where Gonzalo Lira is?
No.
As we said throughout, yes, we do not know, but just as we have been saying throughout this video, we promise that if when we get reliable, factual information, we will definitely share it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Toilet Sauce says, Macron says France should prepare for 60 million refugees from Africa and the Middle East. Can't tell if that was a campaign promise or a threat.
Right.
He did say that, yeah.
He did say that, yeah.
Thank you very much, Toilet Sauce, for that. AZ Mary says, Russia needs to set up an EU list of 1 to 10 of the most anti-Russian countries and always cut off gas to number 1. Watch the race to the bottom.
They've already created a list of what they call unfriendly countries. And, wait and see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Christopher Megia says, do you guys know anything about Gonzalo Lira's current status? We just answered that. Thank you very much, Christopher, for that. We promise any information that we get that is reliable, we promise we will we will share it if we can share that information. Zook, thank you for that super sticker. Candid says, Pilos in Messina is Polioria. Thank you
Beautiful,
very much.
beautiful part of the world, actually.
Thank you.
Messina is an extraordinary part of the world.
Peace Jen says, thanks with that super chat. Jennifer, thank you for that super sticker. Digital Nomad, thank you for that awesome super chat. Commander Crossfire says, Russia has a historic tradition of terrible successions. The better a leader, the worse their successor. Hunter Biden will be the next president of Russia.
But you're making a good point, and many Russians worry about this. That that whenever the leader dies, there's often a succession crisis, and that leaves the fabric of the country severely weakened. And we'll see.
Natiu 2000, thank you for that super chat. Paul Duncan says, may Hungary pass a law to remove the legal power of the European Court and render the EU powerless?
Well, indeed, yeah, quite. We'll see. But don't forget, as I said, Hungary is in a vulnerable position at the moment. This is a difficult crisis for them because their alliance with the Visegrad states, with Poland in particular, has now shattered. And that means that Ursula and her like can try and move to get Hungary stripped of its voting rights on the EU Council. And that is going to act as a constraint on what the Hungarians do.
Multimedia Clip says, keep up the good work, guys. Questions. What are your thoughts about the loss of the ship? You think a missile can take something like that with one shot?
I'm not going to try and say, because I don't have the kind of knowledge, expert knowledge. I'm guessing that a missile could, even if it's quite small, depending on what it hits. That's all I would say. But until what I would suggest is, I gather that there is a Russian investigation. The people in the crew have been questioned. No doubt at some point the Russians will come up with an explanation. When they've come up with that explanation, we could compare it with what the Ukrainians and others are saying, and maybe we can come to a more definite view. I'm excluding nothing at the moment.
Commander Crossfire says you should get Jimmy Dore on. That would be amazing.
Amazing.
You should have us on. Paolo, thank you for that super chat, super sticker. Alexandru says, do you think a conflict in the Balkans is on the way, and how would it affect the EU and NATO?
Yes, it is on the way. It would. I mean, sooner or later, it's bound to come. Might be sooner, might be later. It will be a massive distraction. It could. I think it will be a disaster for NATO and the EU. They will try to get themselves further. They will try to act to control the Balkans even more. Anybody with any knowledge about this part of the world knows how difficult this region is to control. And the Serb people in particular should never be underestimated.
Let's see. Ralph Peterson, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says, rather than learning from the failures, Western world leaders tell themselves it couldn't be helped.
That's exactly right. It's or it's someone else's fault. I mean, like
Someone- it's
Biden is
Putin's
now
fault.
saying that all the people who were, all the inflation is entirely Putin's fault. He's to blame for everything. As if the rain falls in the wrong place, or the weather is too hot, well, it's Putin's fault as well.
JC Adder says, Yanni here, what Europe did not understand is that a unipolar world led by the USA will bring the world to a 1984 Orwell or Brave New World scenario. The USA is a greedy beast that doesn't like to share.
I think it was a huge failure of US policy that they had this enormous moment in 1991 and the way they've squandered it and thrown it away. I think it's a tragedy. I think so much good could have been done. But unfortunately, we had this neocon movement that gained control, and it happened at precisely the same time that we saw the Democratic Party in the United States with the Clintons turn rotten.
Florin, welcome to the Duran community. Divine Insurgent said, random last question. Are your mugs lead free? Are they made from ceramic? I'm considering some merchandise from your shop. Yes, they are. They meet all the standards for everything, for the US, for the EU, all the standards. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, the mugs are great. Let's see. Where are we here? Pasha says, in the US, our succession crisis is that we know who would take over.
That is a very, very interesting point. That's a brilliant point, actually.
Jungle Jin says, couldn't Western Ukraine, if cast adrift and left Europe, eventually become a militarized garrison colony of NATO, full of weapons and missiles?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, left to itself, it could easily become that. It would also become potentially a very unhappy place. My own view about Western Ukraine is that it's viable as an independent country, but that would require Western Ukrainians to make certain correct decisions. I'm starting to wonder whether they can or would be allowed to.
Yeah. James Edwards says, back during the first Cold War, I never opposed Russia. I only opposed the Stalinist-style predatory communism that held them captive. It saddens me immensely to see that my beloved USA and the West are the evil empire now.
Yeah, I share your sentiments completely. I too believed during the Cold War that it was about communism. I'm shattered, horrified to discover the extent to which, for so many people, so many powerful people, ultimately it was always about Russia.
Commander Crossfire says Le Pen recognized the reunification of Crimea with Russia.
Yeah. Well, she's made some very interesting observations. But don't count your chickens, as we say in Britain. She's not president of France yet. Might not be either.
Well. Russ says, did you see the 1969 Kostas Gavras movie Z about corrupt politics in Greece?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great film. By the way, I met him. I mean, a long time ago, and my aunt knew him, of course, very well. It's a brilliant film. If you want to understand the politics of Greece in the 1960s, which I lived through as a child, then there is no better film than that. It's a brilliant film as well, and it's a brilliant film as a thriller. It works brilliantly as a thriller. By the way, it is in French, so do bear that in mind.
Socrates says, what conflict in the Balkans do you foresee? Serbia, Kosovo, Albania, Fyrom, Greece versus Turkey?
Well, apart from the last, which I still think unlikely, all of the others are possible. And the danger is that if you start a conflict in one place, the Balkans being structured as they are, it could feed into a chain reaction. And that is easier to see now than it was in the 1990s, when the Balkan conflicts of that period were very much contained within Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. With Yugoslavia gone, it's easier to see how they could start to filter through.
Can Macron lose on Sunday?
Yes, but that doesn't mean he will. And that doesn't mean either that the powers that be will not do everything they possibly can to make sure that he wins.
If they strip Hungary of their rights, who's next? Poland?
Yeah, ultimately, was a point that Alex made many weeks ago, actually, which is that this obsession with Russia that the Polish government has, Jaroslaw Kaczynski and people like him, blinds them to the real dangers to them, which do not come from Russia.
Diodios Philos Ilocos says, Viva Gonzalo Lira. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Viva Gonzalo Lira. And the final question is James S. Alex, off topic, planning a trip to Greece, Athens, and the islands. What are good months to go, and how is the COOF policy out there?
Well, I think both late spring, not too late because it can get incredibly hot, and I actually like the autumn. But Alex, I don't know what you feel.
Anytime in the summer, if you're going to be by a beach, anytime in the summer.
Well, that's true.
You're fine.
That's true. If you're by the sea, if you're near the sea, well, of course, in Greece, of course, it's easy to be near the sea. Then it's glorious any time in the summer as well, even however hot it gets. What I would say is if it's very, very hot, do keep away from Athens, which can be unbearable in the really hot weather.
Yeah. As far as the COOF policy, it's you need a certificate or some sort of negative something if you want to enter like shops and stuff like that. But for the most part, you can get by fine without it. I don't know about entering the country. I think you just need a test, and you're okay.
Right.
So yeah, I think they actually might get rid of it though, in like the next week or two for the tourist season.
I think quite likely they will.
And Ryan B says, this is the final one. So you two lovebirds met in a park in Moscow. What was your introduction to Gonzalo as romantic? Just jokes. But how did you guys get in touch with Gonzalo? We were doing a live stream, and he just got in touch with us via the chat, and we knew of his channel, his previous channel, the Coach Red Pill channel.
Yes.
That it was. It was a channel that was a really good channel, a big channel, and so we knew of him. And I remember I just saw his logo, his avatar, and we decided to do a collab.
Yes,
that's simple.
Yes,
that's simple. We spoke after the chat. We exchanged info, and we decided to do a collab.
Yeah,
and it grew from there.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Command Unit says Russia has been mostly responding to Western actions, but now the West needs to respond to Russia's actions, and they don't like it.
Indeed, and there is a sense of exhilaration in Russia about that as well. There's anger. There was at the very start of the war a tremor of nervousness and even fear, which is gone, by the way. And now there's anger, determination, and a sense of exhilaration too.
Yeah, and thank you for that final super sticker. Vincent and Sparky has a super chat here, which is Moscow's radar may have been used off-label to blank out RF bands to disrupt communications, as well as RF data streams to missiles, drones, etc.
I've heard a lot about this. Look, I'm not an engineer, or certainly not a radio electronic engineer, so I can't comment about these things. But everybody who provides pieces of information on this it's really useful. But I would say that at the moment we still have very, very little actual concrete, reliable information as to what exactly did happen. So I suspect we will get a report from the Russian Defense Ministry eventually. Maybe we can see, we should wait for that. Even if what it says is false. And, I'm not assuming the Russians are going to tell us the truth. Sometimes the way people lie can in itself be suggestive and can help us to get a better sense of what the truth is.
All right, that is everything. All the questions, all the comments, we actually got through them. We went 40 minutes over.
40 minutes. Well, it was a pleasure.
It was fun. It was
an
fun.
Absolute pleasure.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you to all our moderators, Alan Watson, GEC 812, Reckless Abandon. Is there anyone that I'm missing? I think I got everybody who was moderating today. Thank you for all the help. Let me just do one quick check here. Yes, and thank you to everyone that tuned in from Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, and our awesome Locals community. Don't forget, Alexander will be having his live show on Wednesday on Locals, the Duran.locals.com. Tomorrow, we will be doing a live on all of these platforms with the great Robert Barnes as well. That will be 10 o'clock Vegas time, 6 o'clock, I believe, London time, and 8 o'clock my time, GMT plus 2.
Yeah.
And that's everything. Any final thoughts, Alexander?
Well, I mean, just to also say that, we're all worried about Gonzalo, but let's wait and see what comes. Happy Easter again to everybody. And obviously, we will be continuing to keep a track on what goes on in this great global conflict, which isn't just about Ukraine anymore. In fact, Ukraine is only a small part of it in some respects, though it's still the battlefield where the major fighting is happening.
Yes, we will leave it there. And please be careful with all of the information that's posted on Twitter and on Instagram, all the misinformation that's being posted everywhere.
Absolutely.
Just be careful. Keep your heads up with all of that stuff.
Indeed.
All right.
Absolutely. Yes.
We will leave it there. Take care, everybody.